The office of New York State Attorney General has grown in importance as a bulwark against the toxicity of the Trump administration. We are delighted that we have 4 excellent Democratic candidates for Attorney General, and we want to thank them all for engaging in public dialogue on crucial issues in our government and our society. The candidates will be questioned this evening by our moderator, Damon Jones. Damon Jones is a 28-year veteran of the Westchester Department of Corrections. He's a union delegate for the Westchester Correction Officers Benevolent Association, the New York State representative of Blacks in Law Enforcement of America, and co-chair of the NAACP White Plains Greenberg. He's on the Criminal Justice Committee and co-founder of the Westchester Black Political Conference. Jones is also the former Northeast Region President of the National Black Police Association. He has given expert testimony on police policies and procedures for numerous organizations and served on the NAACP Legal Defense Fund Advisory Board. You can hear Damon on People Before Politics Radio live on Facebook, inthemixradio.com every Sunday, and on the Black Westchester Power Hour the first Monday of every month from 11 a.m. to noon on WVOX AM. He's a busy guy. Ladies and gentlemen, Damon Jones.
Good evening, everybody. I want to thank everybody that's coming out tonight to hear discussion of a very important position in New York State government. Before I introduce the candidates, I went on the Attorney General's website, and there's an explanation of the office on the website, and I think some people have not read it, and if you have not read it, you should read it, but I'm going to read it for you tonight. The New York State Attorney General, as head of the Department of Law, or the Attorney General, is both the people's lawyer and the state's chief legal officer. As the people's lawyer, the Attorney General serves as a guardian of the legal rights of the citizens of New York, its organizations, and its natural resources. In fulfilling the duties of the state's chief legal counsel, the Attorney General not only advises the executive branch of the state government, but also defends actions and proceedings on behalf of the state. The Attorney General serves all New Yorkers in numerous manners affecting their daily lives. The Attorney General's office is charged with the statutory and common law powers to protect consumers and investors, charitable donors, and public health and environment, civil rights, and the rights of wage earners and businesses across the state. The Attorney General authority also includes the activities and investigations of State Organized Crime Task Force and Medical Fraud Control Unit. While the Attorney General acts independently of the governor or state agency may request the Attorney General to undertake specific criminal investigations and prosecutions. The legal functions of the Department of Law are divided primarily into 5 major divisions: appeals, opinions, state councils, criminal justice, economic justice, and social justice. Over 650 assistant attorney generals and over 1,700 employees, including forensic accountants, legal assistants, scientists, investigators, and support staff, serve in the Office of the Attorney General in many locations across New York State. So that's what we're talking about. The person that will lead the Attorney General's office in these functions as the people's lawyer. I would like to introduce the candidates. They are in order A, B, C, and D, and I will read them in that order. First, Sean Patrick Maloney has represented New York 18th District in Congress since 2013. He was born in Quebec, Canada, and grew up in Hanover, New Hampshire. Sean Patrick Mahoney has earned his BA and JD from the University of Virginia. He served in the Clinton administration as Senior West Wing Advisor and White House Staff Secretary. He was also the first Deputy Secretary to New York Governors Eliot Spencer and David Paterson. Sean was an executive in a private equity firm and was elected to Congress in 2012, defeating Republican Nan Hayworth. He is the first, there you go. You get claps for beating a Republican in here. He is the first openly gay person elected to Congress from New York, Mr. Sean Patrick Maloney. Next up is Letitia Tish James, is currently serving in her second term as public advocate for the city of New York, where she acts as a watchdog over city government agencies and an advocate for consumers. She is the first woman of color to hold a citywide office in New York City. Tish James also served as New York City Council member for the 35th District in Brooklyn. Before that, she served as head of Brooklyn Regional Office of New York State Attorney General's Office. Tish began her career in public defender as a legal aid at the Legal Aid Society. She is a graduate of Howard University School of Law and Lehman College and resides in Brooklyn. Ms. Letitia Tish James. Our next candidate is Zephyr Teachout. Did I pronounce it correct? Yes. All right, I'll make sure. I practiced all day on that one. Received a BA from Yale and graduated summa cum laude from Duke Law School, where she was the editor-in-chief of the Law Review. She started her career representing people on death row and co-founded an organization dedicated to training young lawyers in underfunding defense trial work. Zephyr Teachout is the author of a book on history of anti-corruption laws in the United States, Corruption in America. She is associate professor of law at Fordham University and a constitutional law expert. Zephyr has run for statewide office before, losing to the Democratic primary to Andrew Cuomo in 2014. In 2016, she won the Democratic primary for Congress in the 16th district, but lost to John Faso in the general election. Woo, that's it. Ms. Zephyr Teachout. Last but not least, Leisha Eve was born and raised in Buffalo. She graduated from Smith College, the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and Harvard Law School. Leisha served as a counsel to then U.S. Senator Joseph Biden, working on critical civil rights and social justice, including immigration and the implementation of Violence Against Women Act. She was also counsel to then U.S. Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton. She served as Deputy Secretary for the Economic Development for New York and was Chief Economic Development Advisor to Governor Andrew Cuomo. Letitia is Vice President. I messed that up though. I think I did. Did I get it right? Did I get it right? She was Vice President of Government Affairs at Verizon for New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, and serves as the Commissioner of the Port Authority, New York and New Jersey, Miss Letitia Eve. Okay, here's how tonight's discussion will work. Each candidate will have 2 to 3 minutes to make an opening statement. I will then ask a series of questions, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. Then finally, each candidate will have 2 to 3 minutes for a closing statement, and we will rotate who goes first. And we will start off with candidate A, Mr. Maloney.
Thank you. Hey everybody, good evening. You ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
Today, I like today. It's great to be in Westchester. Thank you so much for hosting. Thank you, Westchester Indivisible. I want to say it's great to be on stage with my friends, Letitia James, Zephyr Teachout, and Leisha Eve. I know all these people. These are good people. These are good public servants. They have done a lot of good work. And I hope that nothing in this campaign detracts from the fact that we agree about a lot, and we are all united in trying to beat Donald Trump. And I'm not going to say a negative thing about any of them. I want you to know if any one of these people beats me in this primary, I'm going to be there the next day working my butt off to get him elected Attorney General of New York. And I hope they will all support the winner of this primary too. But check it out. You know me, boy. My favorite introduction is it's the man who beat Nan Hayward. That's truth is, we beat her twice. And I also want to say, because I'm a Westchester, thanks for beating Rob Astorino. Doesn't it? It feels good to win. And Democrats need to win more. We need to stop whining. We need to start winning. Let's beat Donald Trump. Let's win elections. That's what I do. And you know me as a 3-term member of Congress who has beaten 3 conservative Republicans in a row in a tough part of the world, the district that voted for Donald Trump. And I'm very proud of that. I couldn't have done it without you. The fact is that a lot of my life, the simple truth is I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to be somebody who was on the inside like this for a member of Congress. You know this. I am the first openly gay member of Congress in the history of the state of New York. Never happened before. Which means, yeah, you can clap for that. And it wasn't a given that a gay guy with an interracial family was going to beat Nan Hayward. But we did it, didn't we? We did it. And if I can beat Nan Hayward in the Trump district, what the hell's wrong with the Democratic Party? We can win everywhere. Don't tell me we can't win elections. Good gracious, right? It can't be harder than this, right? And I get to say what no candidate for Attorney General and no member of Congress in New York has ever said before, no guy has ever been able to say, which is my husband is here tonight, Randy Florkey. I'm very glad about that. And for our whole career together, our whole lives together, you know, we have adopted 3 children together. We have been doing this since 1992, ladies and gentlemen. We had a 22-year engagement and a 4-year marriage. So for 26 years, all you guys who think you had it tough, let me tell you what, try and be engaged for 22 years, ladies. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. The truth is my whole life, I've been able to get on the inside, but I have always felt that it's my obligation to fight for people who don't have their rights. Whether I was in law school working with migrant workers out in rural Virginia, or at the law firm fighting for tenants in a class action pro bono, or for getting political asylum for those folks who needed it. Whether I was in the White House, where I was on the White House senior staff, and no one like me had ever served there before, but I spent my time fighting for hate crimes victims, and getting us out to the funeral of Matthew Shepard, and representing pro bono when I got out of the White House. And when I went to the governor's office, I focused on writing the first marriage equality law in the history of New York, and we introduced it in the legislature and got it passed a couple months later. I'm very proud of that. We could have focused on other stuff. That's what I focused on. And when I was working to get a SUNY CUNY endowment of billions of dollars that would have revolutionized public education and higher education here in New York. And now that I've been in Congress, I've been on the front lines for 18 months against Donald Trump and 6 years against the Tea Party. And whether you're talking about the assault on the Affordable Care Act, or whether you're talking about the Muslim ban, or whether you're talking about LGBT equality or the environment, I have been in the fight, and we have done a lot of winning, and we have been playing good defense. But I'll tell you what, I don't want to be on defense anymore. I want to be on offense. That's what this race is about. That's what this year is about. And with your help, we are going to make some real progress and win some real victories. And I look forward to discussing the issues with all of you tonight. Thank you for being here.
So my name is Letitia James, and I want to thank all of you here today for all of your progress in resisting Donald Trump. All I know all throughout my life is a fight. When I was around 11 years old, my mother took me to criminal court because my brother was arrested. When I went into criminal court, everyone in the courtroom did not look like me other than the defendants. It was that point in time when I recognized and understood the point of justice and standing up and fighting for your rights. When the correction officer said to my mother, "Sit down, shut up, don't ask me where your son is," I vowed at that time, all throughout my public career, that I would commit to public service and to doing one thing, and that is following and serving justice. So as a former public defender, I represented countless number of children in the criminal justice system. Because when you're at your lowest, you still need someone to defend your rights. As a former assistant attorney general who sued predatory lenders, who was part of an investigation into stop and frisk practices, and also consumers, representing consumers who were being preyed upon by unscrupulous businesses throughout the city of New York. I then went on to work in the state legislature for 10 years where I drafted and negotiated laws. And then as a city council member representing in Brooklyn, I went up against one of the most powerful developers in downtown Brooklyn for violating eminent domain abuses, for the worst team in the NBA. And it's okay if you've been to the arena. But I had to stand for them. I also sued Mayor Bloomberg for the extension of the third term. I've sued Mayor de Blasio several times. And I'm the only candidate who's running for Attorney General that has sued the governor of the state of New York not once, not twice, but 3 times. And now as the public advocate of the city of New York, I've passed more laws than all previous public advocates combined, including banning salary history, because equal pay for equal work should be more than a slogan. It should be actualized. Women deserve to be paid the same as men for doing the same job. And then lastly, I have changed the office of public advocate. We have filed more lawsuits. And I have not only acted on behalf of your interests, but I have stood against Donald Trump. I've been a plaintiff and filed a number of amicus briefs. Muslim ban 1, Muslim ban 2, Muslim ban 3, the LGBT, fights against Title 10, fights against Planned Parenthood. Because what happens between me and my body and women in this room is between us and our God and no one else. And lastly, as the public advocate, I've stood up to the NRA and divested and urged the pension board to divest from retailers, and we won. As a member of the NYS board, again, we divested from fossil fuels, and we won. What we need now more than ever in the office of Attorney General is an Attorney General who can fight back and who's not afraid of bullies and who speaks truth to power and who has a consistent record of getting things done and who wakes up every day focused on justice. Thank you.
Good evening. I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much to the incredible groups that organized it and got all 4 candidates here. Thank you to the moderator. Special shout out for those of you who are working to elect Alessandro Biaggi. I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting this race, but what I want to talk about tonight is law. I am a constitutional and anti-corruption law expert. I started my career as a death penalty lawyer representing the most hated people in society, having to use creativity and tenacity to dig up difficult facts and unused laws to be able to stop the train that was coming towards my client and stop the state from killing them. Right now, we are not in normal times. Donald Trump is posing an existential threat. We have a moral crisis in this country. We have a democratic crisis in this country. We have a constitutional crisis in this country. And yes, we need and are going to have a blue Congress in 2018. And yes, you may open the paper every day wanting to know what Mueller is doing. But there are things that the New York State Attorney General can do to take on the threat of Donald Trump that nobody else can do, and that is what I will do as the next Attorney General of the state of New York. Ever since he got elected, since a week after he got elected, I have been working with the top lawyers in the country, building a legal strategy to take on Donald Trump's businesses. And 2 weeks ago, we had a major victory in district court, in federal court in Maryland, and the judge there cited my research directly. We're talking about winning against Donald Trump. We gotta follow the money, investigate his businesses. Just today, I don't know if you want to call it a victory, but I have spoken out about prosecuting ICE agents who are violating the law, raping people, causing people to die in detention, saying that no one is above the law, and explaining how in New York State, our hands aren't tied. We can actually prosecute criminal behavior, and we must make that totally clear. And because of that, I was on Fox and Friends and Breitbart and NRA TV because they are scared about what's happening when I'm the next Attorney General of New York State. The The two most important things, and I will talk further about the other parts of the job, but one is the deep expertise and the other is independence. And when I'm your Attorney General, I promise you that I will answer to no one but the people of the state of New York, my conscience, and the law. Thank you.
Good evening, Westchester Democrats. It is an honor to be here. My name is Licia Eve, and I am running as the most qualified, experienced candidate ready to be the effective Attorney General we must have on January 1. I am a daughter of this state. I have only called New York my home. Born and reared in Buffalo, a product of the Buffalo Public Schools. As was mentioned, I went to the Kennedy School and Harvard Law School. My first job out of law school was clerking for the first African American to serve a full term on the state's highest court, the Honorable Fritz W. Alexander. So for the first 2 years out of law school, I had discussions with jurists on the state's highest court about the most fundamental legal issues of our time, based upon the state's constitution, state statutes, and the federal constitution. Went to Washington, was a litigator in federal and state court. The case that I am most proud of in my almost 28 years as a lawyer was a case where I represented with 3 other young women associates, all women incarcerated in District of Columbia prisons, against the District of Columbia because of prison conditions they were living in. As you can imagine, when you sue the government of the most powerful city of the most powerful nation on earth, you get a lot of pushback. But we stayed the course. I stayed the course because my client had her legs shackled to a bed after she brought a child into this world. 2 legs, 1 arm, in the nation's capital, in the greatest democracy on earth. I am proud to say we not only fought, we won. And this case served as a precedent not only for the District of Columbia, but for prison reform across the country. As was mentioned, I had the honor of serving as a counsel to Joe Biden, advising him on a range of issues, and most especially implementation of the Violence Against Women Act, which he authored working with hundreds of organizations across the country, helping survivors of domestic violence and physical assault. Worked in the trenches with Hillary, fighting for reproductive rights, fighting for civil rights, fighting for good judges, fighting against the assault on our rights, fighting against bad judges. Served as the first woman and person of color in the state's history to be the chief economic development advisor to a governor of our state, overseeing 11 agencies in state government. When I left the government, they split my job and gave it to 2 different people. And I proudly work for a company now that puts about 20,000 New Yorkers to work every day while serving as a volunteer capacity as a commissioner of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The breadth and depth of my experience makes me best prepared to continue the good work, to fight against the assault on our rights by Donald Trump, to deal with the bad actors in this state, and equally important, to help move our state forward on so many fronts where we should be leading and not following. So I look forward to the discussion tonight, and it is with great respect and humility that I hope that I earn your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the wonderful openings, and we're going to start with the questions. Each candidate has 2 minutes to answer the questions, and we're going to start off the round of questions. We're going to start with Tish and work our way back to Patrick. The first question is Trump business. In June, this is the question now, in June, the New York Attorney General's office sued the Trump Foundation, accusing it and the Trump family of sweeping violations of campaign finance laws, self-dealing, and illegal coordination with the presidential campaign. What other actions against the Trump Foundation or other business dealings that violate the emolument clause should be considered, and what can be done to make his tax returns public?
So first, we want to congratulate Barbara Underwood for bringing that case. And as the next Attorney General, I proudly will work on side by side with Barbara Underwood. As she no longer is a Solicitor General, she will be moved into the Executive Office to continue the work of this one case that she brought on the emoluments violation. But it's important to understand that there are other businesses in New York City and in New York State that are owned by Donald Trump that require an investigation. In addition to that, we should really focus on those children right now who are separated from their parents. I am one of the plaintiffs representing some of these children. And right now we were successful working with legal services and with the ACLU. And so now no child in New York State can be removed without giving notice to legal services and to the ACLU, and that is a major victory. We should not live in a country where children are separated from their parents. We should also go after Donald Trump because we will not and should not pardon any one of state crimes in New York State. And so we have got to close that pardon loophole, this piece of legislation which is pending in Albany. And as someone who has worked in Albany, who has a relationship with both the Senate and the Assembly, and who has already spoken to both leaders with regards to that bill, we've got to negotiate that bill, and I'm confident that when Letitia James becomes Attorney General, that bill will be passed in the first 100 days. It's important also to understand that we need to go after Donald Trump because we recognize that he refuses to release his tax returns. And as was mentioned, we've got to follow the money. But I am right now focused on turning the House blue and making sure that these midterm elections, that we have Democrats in Congress. And last but not least, my focus right now is making sure that the United States Supreme Court, that we provide steel to the backbone of these Democrats, and that this individual, who will be the next Supreme Court Justice, be denied. We need to delay and deny this individual from being a Supreme Court Justice. So we can bring a number of cases against Donald Trump, particularly in violation of our Constitution, but most importantly, what we've got to do is focus on turning our country from red to blue. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. There are about 4 key legal strategies that we need to pursue to go after Donald Trump's businesses. When you go after systemic illegality, you have to go after the money and do intensive financial investigations. That's true of the mafia, and that's true when we see how Donald Trump is using his office really as a kleptocrat to enrich himself in his office. So number 1, New York is not right now part of the emoluments lawsuits. I was one of 2 experts in the country of emoluments before he took office. I literally wrote the book on corruption and anti-corruption laws. And I've been advising attorneys general in other states on bringing this suit. We had this major victory a few weeks ago, but there's a gaping hole in it. The victory could lead to the divestment of the Trump Hotel in DC. But we need the divestment of all the businesses, and the businesses are located here in New York. I encouraged Eric Schneiderman to pursue this, and as Attorney General, I would pursue that. Number 2, the New York Attorney General has a responsibility under both Executive Law 6312 and 1101, our business laws, to oversee the integrity of the businesses in New York State. So this comes from New York State law. What that means is the New York Attorney General has the authority and responsibility to investigate systemic illegality in businesses that are located in New York. The very hub of his 500 businesses are here, of the Trump Organization, are here in New York. And we should be pursuing that. That is something I spoke about starting in early 2017, and have worked with top litigators around the country on explaining how the New York State AG can pursue that. Number 3, we need a criminal investigation along with a civil investigation into legal violations in the state. I see this as central to the job of the next Attorney General, because this is the bulwark against radical kleptocracy at the top. Thank you.
I also want to applaud the tremendous work of the current Attorney General, Barbara Underwood, in terms of her now litigation against the Trump Foundation. The emoluments clause is actually something that I'm intimately familiar with long before we heard of somebody named Donald Trump. because as the advisor to 2 United States senators, the emolument clause actually governs not only the conduct of the president, but it also governs conduct of members of Congress. So members of Congress can't accept gifts from foreign governments. So as they're traveling around the world, if they get a gift from a foreign government, there's a process that every appropriate Senate office has where they record those gifts and they turn them over to the Library of Congress. So it is a provision that I am intimately familiar with, because it was my job to help a member to make sure that she complied fully with that clause and that there was sufficient record keeping to make sure that she did so, and I'm proud to say that she did. As a litigator, as a very aggressive litigator, what I would do as Attorney General is conduct an extensive investigation of his businesses to the extent that there is a sense that there have been violations of either civil or criminal law. I have deposed many a corporation. As a law clerk to the state's highest court, we dealt with lots of business crimes. We dealt with lots of civil litigation involving corporations. And one of the key things that you do as a corporate litigator, and I have that experience in spades, is you follow the money, and the best evidence about where the money is in a tax return. Look what we're dealing right now. Bob Mueller is focused on what? Paul Manafort, and whether he properly disclosed all of his income in his tax return. So it is hard work, but it's not rocket science. If you've been a litigator and you've seen the inside of a federal courtroom, you know that the discovery process is a powerful tool to get at the president's tax returns when there have been sufficient facts to support violations of either civil or criminal law under New York State. As Attorney General, that is a path that I would take to get that information. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, the number one thing the next Attorney General or any of us is going to do to hold Donald Trump accountable is keep Bob Mueller on the job. We need to protect Bob Mueller. And the number one arena where this fight is being waged, ladies and gentlemen, is in Washington. And I'm here to tell you, I am the only person on the stage with any Washington experience at all. And that is a critical issue right now when you think about the work of the next New York Attorney General. And what is that experience? Well, I started out working on the senior staff at the White House, and in that position I had a code word top secret national security clearance and routinely read all the national security information with respect to Russia. As a member of Congress, I routinely received classified briefings from our nation's top intelligence officials. I am deeply immersed in the details of the Russia investigation and all of the issues before the Intelligence Committee in the House. In addition to that, we receive briefings directly from Rod Rosenstein. I know exactly the work they're doing. I understand exactly what we have to complete if that work is interrupted. I can tell you right now, Bob Mueller is in the hunt. He has already demonstrated that a bunch of Russians conspired to break our laws, and what we want to know is who the Americans were who were conspiring with them. And I am going to get to the truth of that, but I hope Bob Mueller gets there first. But the New York Attorney General better be ready to stand in the breach if Donald Trump moves against Rod Rosenstein, moves against Bob Mueller, or pardons himself or others. And we should close that loophole in New York law. It's important how you do it, but we ought to do it. But you better have somebody who understands the federal players and what we're up against. Just last week, a bunch of us in the House fought tooth and nail and stopped the Freedom Caucus from impeaching Rod Rosenstein. That was last week, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're going to fight Republicans, you better have some experience beating Republicans, and you're going to want somebody who beats Republicans, and that's what I have done since you have known me in public life. And if you give me this chance, I'll tell you what, we are going to take a stand. And if Bob Mueller needs backup, I'm ready to be there. Thank you very much.
The next round of questions, we will start with Ms. Teachout, and is criminal justice reform. This past year, New York finally righted the long-standing injustice by raising the age of criminal responsibility from 16 to 18 years of age. State attorneys across the county are using various approaches to address systematic criminal justice issues such as mass incarceration, policing practices, and changing in criminal sentencing. What approach will you use to attempt to reform the criminal justice system in New York?
Thank you for the question. this is something that is central to what I want to do as New York Attorney General. It's really critical that we deal with this ongoing crisis. I was just talking about the Trump crisis. We've had an epidemic of mass incarceration for decades now, and we've got to change it. As a death penalty lawyer, I spent a lot of time in prisons and jails. I saw up close what mass incarceration looks like and what structural racism looks like. I believe we need to cut our incarcerated population in half by 2030. I believe it is critical that law enforcement be the leading voice against what is happening in our criminal justice system. As much as a third of the people who are now incarcerated have not been found guilty, they're there in jail, not prison, they haven't had a trial, and they have to pay cash bail. That is not law or justice. To say how much you can pay determines how many days you spend in a cell with somebody watching you. We have to end cash bail. We need, New York State's discovery laws are so bad that they're some of the worst in the country. What that means is while you are sitting there in a cell before your trial in New York, you do not have the right to know what the witness statements are against you. In Texas, you have the right to know the witness statements against you. That is wrong. We need discovery reform. We need marijuana legalization. And we need to make sure we don't just look forward but backward at all the people who have been imprisoned because of unjust and racist laws. We need parole reform. We need to work on re-entry. And we basically need to understand that white-collar crime has to be our priority. And I don't take corporate money, so I'm ready to do that. But we cannot say that we stand for justice if we have the current system of criminal injustice that we have now. Thank you.
I first wanted to, because this is about sharing facts, I wanted just to, with all due respect, correct something that one of my opponents, Shaw, said that was factually inaccurate. He mentioned there was only one person with Washington experience. As I mentioned, I represented hundreds of women incarcerated in District of Columbia prisons against the District of Columbia in federal court. We won in federal court. It was appealed to the appellate court. We won there. They tried to take it to the United States Supreme Court, and our release stood. And as I mentioned, I proudly worked for both Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. And so I have a very good sense, better than I believe, than any candidate running, of how to fight in Washington and how to win. But to the question at hand on criminal justice reform, this is not a theoretical discussion for me. This is very personal. It's my family and it's my life's work. Many of you know that my father, Arthur Eve, who served with distinction in the New York State Assembly for 36 years, was the first person to enter the Attica prison during the riots because the prisoners recognized him as a champion for prison reform. I didn't understand it at the time, but when I was 7, when that happened, I didn't know what was going on, but years later, as a teenager, I understood that my father went into that prison not knowing whether he would come out, and he went in any event. My mother, 15 years later, founded what became the largest and most comprehensive alternatives to incarceration for women in the state of New York, in the state's history, and 15 years later, I represented women prisoners incarcerated in the District of Columbia prisons. We need to legalize marijuana. We need to expunge the records of every single person who was convicted of recreational use of marijuana so that they can turn their lives around. We need to close Rikers Island. We need to increase our alternatives to incarceration. We need to get rid of cash bail. And we need to investigate, and as Attorney General, I would have significantly more oversight over district attorneys who clearly need to be doing much more to make sure that all defendants receive a fair trial. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I have to tell you, I care a lot about this issue, and I really want to recognize my husband, Randy, who has spent a big part of the last few years working on prison education programs. And in fact, it was because of Randy that I think I'm the first member of Congress in New York history ever to deliver a commencement address behind bars at the Bard College graduation ceremony at Woodburn. And the fact is that sometimes the person, sometimes the solution is the person we thought was the problem. And what I have done in Congress is partner with people like Brian Stevenson, who wrote the wonderful book Just Mercy, and my friend Cory Booker to write legislation. I mean, it's one thing to talk about it, it's another to write laws and to change it. And what I've done in Congress is write legislation that would create a pre-conviction cause of action for people around their right, under Gideon v. Wainwright, to have a real lawyer, to have counsel. And if people had real lawyers, they couldn't be incarcerated so easily. And the fact is that if communities and municipalities and states had to pay for real representation for people they are getting ready to throw away, you would have a lot fewer people locked up. You would not have so many nonviolent offenders in prison. We could do so much better than we are right now. The fact is we need to get away with cash bail, that's right. I support decriminalizing and legalizing marijuana, that's important. But the first and most important thing we need to do is we need to start seeing the human beings who are in prison as human beings. And we need to understand there is a real cost to them and us for continuing to keep them locked away. I am very proud that I have 2 formerly incarcerated people on my staff right now. I'm not just talking about it. I believe in this very firmly. And I can tell you that if we can look beyond one mistake or one problem, there's a world we can enter where we can return thousands and thousands of people to their families. That's what we did with the First Step law that my friend Hakeem Jeffries and I worked on and passed through a Republican Congress just a couple of weeks ago. This is a bipartisan opportunity, ladies and gentlemen. There are good people in the conservative movement, religious conservatives who believe in prison reform. We need to seize that opportunity, and we can change our country in the next few years. And as New York Attorney General, I promise you I will be a leader in that fight. Thank you very much.
So I started my morning today talking to 100 individuals who are formerly incarcerated who registered to vote. I spoke to them this morning. I'm a former legal aid attorney, but I'm still a criminal defense attorney because every week someone knocks on my door urging me to go down into court to get their son or daughter out of the system. As someone who was responsible for a second chance program working with the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, where we give individuals a second chance and we expunge their warrants, I'm happy about that. I've worked with the District Attorney of Brooklyn to move forward on an issue of looking at conviction integrity review. And so as the next Attorney General of the state of New York, we will have a conviction review panel in the Office of Attorney General. Obviously, we need to close Rikers Island. And as someone who went before the correction board and urged that we close Rikers Island because of all of the sexual abuses, not only against correction officers, but also against inmates, I'm really proud that that passed. We need to legalize marijuana. We need to decriminalize mental illness and poverty, which is responsible for the countless number of people who are Rikers Island. We also need to invest more money in schools and not jails. A lot of the crimes that we have on the book are catch-all crimes, and we need to decriminalize them and make them civil in nature. We also need more alternatives to incarceration. We need to end cash bail. We need to make sure that there are more caseworkers and social workers and individuals in mental health. And we need to invest, obviously, in providing supportive housing and housing for individuals who transition out of the correctional facility here in the state of New York. I've worked on this all of my life, and I am focused on this because each and every day I see individuals who come out of the criminal justice system who are continued to be discriminated against. We can end this, and we can work together. We can work with the state legislature to make this a reality. And last but not least, there's a bill pending on the desk of Governor Cuomo, which would prosecute prosecutors who violate the law. And I am urging, as I urged yesterday, Governor Cuomo to sign that bill because no one is above the law, including prosecutors in every county in the state of New York.
Next question, we'll start off with Ms. Eve, and it's ethics reform. What is your specific plan to root out public corruption in state government, considering the number of elected officials from both parties and top aides to Governor Cuomo who have been convicted and or currently face trial for corruption?
This is an incredibly important issue And I say that from a personal as well as a candidate perspective because I know what good public servants look like. I view public service as a calling. I'm the daughter of two extraordinary public servants, and too many elected and appointed officials in this state have conducted themselves in a way that is the antithesis of that. I am on record saying, and I would aggressively advocate as Attorney General for an amendment to the state's constitution that would dramatically restructure how we deal with ethics reform in this state. I do not believe it should be one that is almost entirely under the purview of the executive branch. It should be an independent, nonpartisan body based upon the state constitution. That body should have investigative powers, subpoena powers, the power to refer criminal prosecutions to the Attorney General, and it also should oversee campaign finance. I am a strong proponent for public finance. I think $65,000 $100 contributions are obscene, and they shouldn't exist anywhere in our democracy. They are the current law, but we need to have public financing of campaigns. I believe state legislators should get paid more, but then every single dollar of outside income should be banned so that there is no room for people to be tempted, either proactively or somewhat indirectly. Lastly, I do believe the LLC loophole should be closed. I do not believe in unilateral disarmament, but I have not received and do not expect to receive any LLC resources. But I believe at the end of the day, we need to have public financing of campaigns so that all people, regardless of their means and regardless of where they are in the state, can have the resources that they need if they are the best candidate to run an effective campaign and to win. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. This issue is so important. Money is killing us in politics. It's absolutely killing us. The number one thing we should do is end Citizens United. We've got to end Citizens United. And if you want to know what's at stake, in Washington with the Supreme Court fight, just look at what's happening. We are on the verge of Donald Trump and the Republicans taking over the Supreme Court. And that means on Roe v. Wade to the environment, but especially on money in politics, we are going the wrong way, ladies and gentlemen. And don't look any further than Albany if you want to see corruption in politics. So you better have an Attorney General who is independent and can take a sledgehammer to that place and isn't going to be beholden to any of the politicians in Albany for this job. This person ought to be picked by the voters. We've had a lot of game playing in this campaign so far, where they were trying to shut it down earlier. They were trying to have somebody picked on the inside. But the fact is, this is going to the voters good, because the next Attorney General ought to be independent of anybody in Washington. I don't care if you're Donald Trump. I don't care if you're Andrew Cuomo in Albany. I don't care if you're some billionaire on Wall Street. This person needs to stand up and hold those people accountable. End outside income for legislators. End member items for sure. Change the law to make the Attorney General have general authority to investigate public corruption. This office doesn't have that. This office needs a referral from the governor or another senior official to investigate public corruption. Well, what the hell is that? How are you going to investigate the governor if you have to go to the governor and say, can I investigate you? Good luck doing that. So what are you saying to change that? How about we let the Attorney General look at whatever is wrong? That's the number one thing we're going to do, and you better be independent of the governor if you're going to get that changed, right? And so the fact of the matter is, you got to change the law, you got to have somebody who's independent, you're going to have to do things like have a real ethics commission for sure, and outside income. I'd like to see term limits, honestly. I wish we could throw out half the legislators in Albany and start over again, because I think we have given such a bad name to public service with so much money sloshing around. And by the way, can we have a ban on lobbying by anybody who's a member of Congress or an assemblyman or anybody else, so they don't leave the public office and go trade on it to lobby? Because that is the most corrupting thing I see every day down in Washington, is people do things in public life and then turn around and make money off of it the second they walk out the door. That's not public service, that's feathering your nest. And I wouldn't mind a ban on that, and I'd live by it by everybody else. I am not in this for the money, and I think, ladies and gentlemen, you deserve a democracy as good as you are, and money is killing us. Thank you for that question.
In the city council where I served for 10 years, we have term limits. Not only should we have term limits on the state legislature, but we should have term limits on Congress as well.
Amen.
Because we have a significant number of members of Congress who do absolutely nothing. And the reality is that we need more Democrats with steel in their spine to stand up against Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump right now has committed obstruction of justice, and he should be convicted of that crime and jury tampering after his tweet yesterday. We should end the LLC loophole. We should repeal Citizens United. We should end corporate money, and we should make sure that individuals get small donations. I stand before you as a public advocate of the city of New York because of campaign finance. Most of the individuals who contributed to me during my public advocate race were individuals with no collars, pink collars, primarily women who work each and every day. That's why I stand before you as a public advocate of the city of New York. We need to make J-Code, we need to tear it down and eliminate J-Code and rebuild it as an independent entity. Someone with no ties to the governor of the state of New York. And last but not least, we need to make sure that the Attorney General has the ability to prosecute corruption and, as was mentioned, does not need approval of the governor of the state of New York. Not only do we need to have a standing commitment and an independent Attorney General to investigate corruption, but also sexual harassment, because time is up in Albany. We also need to focus, and as someone who wrote to Governor Cuomo and to Eric Snyderman and said to them, we need a special prosecutor to investigate police, particularly when individuals die at police hands. I'm so glad that they responded and they appointed Eric Snyderman to investigate investigations where individuals unfortunately died at the hands of NYPD. You see, I went into court and sought to get the grand jury minutes related to Eric Garner, because what we saw in that videotape did not lie. We went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And so we need to end that grand jury system, because the district attorney and the police have a unique relationship. And because the grand jury system is opaque. And what we need is to change this anachronistic system and reform the criminal justice system, as well as change ethics rules in the state of Albany. If anyone can get it done, it's someone who's worked at Albany, who's been an attorney in Albany, and who knows how the legislature works in Albany. And I look forward to doing that as the next Attorney General of the state of New York.
If you want somebody who is fully ready to investigate, prosecute without fear or favor until we clean up our Albany corruption problem, you got her. Okay, number one. This is my life's work. I know these laws. I know how to enforce these laws. And I was cited extensively by Justice Stevens in the dissent of Citizens United, which we are going to overturn and make the majority. I am currently suing to overturn part of Citizens United. I'm doing the work right now to overturn single candidate super PACs. But let's talk about Albany for a second. Do you guys remember when Andrew Cuomo shut down the Moreland Commission? Somebody was clapping. I'm not clapping, sorry. Whatever you think of the governor, that was wrong. We have a corruption crisis in Albany that is hurting this state, and I spoke up about it then. But here's something you don't know. He forgot to formally rescind the legal powers. So yes, we need some structural change in Albany, but when I get there, we are going to use the existing powers. I'm serious. I'm a really good lawyer. The powers are there now. I'm going to use those existing powers that Andrew Cuomo never formally rescinded. Executive Order 106, you can look it up, to investigate corruption in Albany right now. And the reason you know I will be independent in that is because I am willing to tell you right now, Andrew Cuomo has to take responsibility for this, and to openly disagree with him on choices that he has made. Right now, the head of the current Ethics Commission, Jay Cope, has to resign because it's a mess and it's not actually investigating corruption. His name is Seth Agata. To say that, I have to be willing to confront the governor. You know I'm independent because I always have been. And the other reason you know I'm independent, I don't take any corporate money. Zero corporate PAC money, zero LLC money, and 97% of my donations are people who've given less than $200. So I got independence at my base and in my soul, and I'm ready to take this on. Thank you.
The next question, we're going to start with Mr. Maloney and his civil rights. Donald Trump could undermine civil rights progress more than any other president in modern history. He has fanned the flames of racism, bigotry, xenophobia, and has effectively used the executive action to significantly roll back civil rights enforcement in this country. What needs to be done at the state level to make sure that the civil rights of New Yorkers are protected?
Yeah, this is an important issue to me. I served in the Congress with John Lewis, and one of the great experiences I've had in my life is bringing Randy and my 3 kids, who are Latino and African American, to Selma, Alabama for the 50th anniversary of the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And to stand there with the President of the United States, Barack Obama, and John Lewis, and to make that march was an emotional and powerful experience. But what I remember actually didn't happen in Alabama. It happened in Washington in the cloakroom, and I was standing at the lunch counter with John Lewis, and it was the day that the Supreme Court struck down part of the Voting Rights Act. And he said to me, Sean, I was standing next to the desk, next to President Johnson when he signed the Voting Rights Act 48 years ago. And if you told me, John Lewis, so he said, little brother, if you told me we would still be fighting for that, I would have found it hard to believe. And it's people like you who are going to have to pick up the torch and keep fighting. And one of my proudest moments in Congress was when John Lewis grabbed me coming off the floor when we had stopped an anti-LGBT amendment on the floor by getting 24 Republicans to support us and stop them in their tracks, not once, but twice, not 1 year, but 2 years. Every year I fight back the anti-LGBT amendments in the defense bill. I win that fight. And John Lewis pulled me aside and he said, keep fighting, little brother. The point is we all have to keep fighting. We all have to keep fighting. We have so many bridges left to cross. Edmund Pettus Bridge was just the beginning. And we're still fighting for Voting Rights Act. We're still fighting for Civil Rights Act. There are young men carrying torches on the lawn of the University of Virginia shouting, Jews will not replace us. What the hell is going on in our country, ladies and gentlemen? And if you think any one of us is going to fix it, forget about it. It's up to all of us, all of you. Everybody's got to participate in this. It is all hands on deck. And we need to speak with one voice this November and say we are going to reject these hateful policies, whether it's the Muslim ban, whether it's running down immigrants, whether it's hating on dreamers, whether it's pulling kids away from their parents at the border. This is not the United States of America that people like John Lewis have fought so hard to create. This is somebody else's vision. And it's not a vision I'm very proud of. So we have to take our country back. And if we don't do it in the area of civil rights, then shame on us. And I believe we are going to have a new day. I believe we are going to have a day coming in November where we speak up once again and say we're going back up, not down. We're going to bring everybody in and we're going to do this together. And I can't wait to be the Attorney General of New York to lead that fight and to make history as the state's first openly gay statewide elected official. Thank you for your support on that issue. It's going to be so important for all of our futures.
I graduated from Howard University when the civil rights movement was drafted. Howard University and the individuals such as Thurgood Marshall, our first African-American Supreme Court Justice, crafted the civil rights legislation in the halls of Howard University. And Clarence Thomas, unfortunately, has disrespected his legacy. I went to Howard University because I wanted to walk the same walls where the civil rights legislation was drafted, and because Howard University was a school that focuses on building social engineers. I'm a proud social engineer, and someone who recognizes that civil rights is something that all of us must care about. And so at this point in time, this precarious point in our history in this country, where we are more torn now, we are more divided since the Civil War, we need to set aside these artificial constructs such as race and focus on our humanity and what brings us together as a community. And so what we need now is federalism. We need to make sure that the laws of the state of New York protect individuals. We need to codify Roe v. Wade. We need to make sure that our civil rights laws, that we protect the right to vote, that we harden our system against individuals in Russia or Iran or China that want to affect our elections. We need to make sure that the Janus decision here in the state of New York, we protect the right to organize and the labor movement. Because the reason why we are here today, the reason why we enjoy so many rights, the reason why some of us have pensions and have 8 hours and have women's rights and civil rights laws is because of the labor movement. And the reason why you've got a weekend off is because of the labor movement. We've got to make sure that our laws are strengthened here in the state of New York. And most of all, we've got to pass gender and make sure that we protect members of the LGBT community and lastly, immigrants who are under attack. Their rights are under attack at this point in time. And so civil rights is something I live and breathe. And civil rights is the reason why I'm an attorney today. And civil rights will be a priority as I serve as the next Attorney General of the great state of New York.
In 2010, the summer of 2010, Arizona passed a law, SB 1070. And this law said that police officers should stop people who looked, quote unquote, suspicious. So I flew to Arizona, and I spent the summer in Arizona working with civil rights activists, litigating and agitating. I got kicked out of a Joe Arpaio rally on Richard Spencer's ranch that I was protesting. And I'll tell you, the seeds of what we have right now in this country go extremely deep. They go back hundreds of years. But in 2010, I saw the seeds of what we are seeing right now, which is this radical dehumanization of immigrants, this radical rejection of the most basic values in our society. I gotta tell you one of the things that is so wrong with the most recent Supreme Court decision in the Muslim ban case. It's not just that it upholds a bigoted law. It's that it legally rationalizes bigotry if it's done in the name of national security. And you wonder why they're trying to shove everything in the national security realm and put ICE in national security? It's because then it rationalizes, it says, we're not going to look under the hood if you're a bigot, as long as you're doing it in the name of national security. And I am really proud to have the support of some of the best lawyers in the country, the lawyers who are out there winning that Charlottesville case, the lawyers who are cited in dissent in the Muslim ban case, because they know that I will be creative, tenacious, dedicated, find new ways to overturn this terrible precedent. What you really also want to know is that when you can't trust the federal government on civil rights, you need the state attorney general to stand up for them. That means aggressive. That means we got to triple our game at home. Because if we don't protect our own New York state and federal civil rights here at home in New York, then there's nobody else who's going to protect them. Thank you.
New York is the home of the environmental movement. It's the home of the LGBTQ movement. It is the home of the labor movement. It's the home of the suffrage movement. Throughout our nation's history, New York has led. There's one place where we don't, and that concerns the ability of millions of New Yorkers to vote. If I am fortunate enough to be elected your next Attorney General, there will be no more fierce aggressor against Donald Trump. I know what it's like to fight in the trenches. I did it with Joe Biden. I know what it's like to fight in the trenches. I did it with Hillary for 4.5 years. And I'm talking about in the trenches, things that maybe the New York Times, or the Daily News, or the Post won't write about. But one of the pieces of legislation that I crafted for Hillary that she introduced, about which I am most proud, is a piece of legislation that I worked on with voting rights and civil rights organizations across this state and across this nation, called the Count Every Vote Act. It had not only felon reenfranchisement, it had same-day registration, it had no excuse absentee balloting, it had early voting. Things that Florida has, and with the exception of felon reenfranchisement, that the state that has been the birthplace of all the great movements in our nation does not. There are a lot of things that we have to fix where Donald Trump is the cause, but our jacked up voting system, that's on us. That's on us. And I am proud to stand before you as the crafter of legislation that the New York Times editorialized as the gold standard for election reform for our nation, that as Attorney General will be the gold standard for election reform right here in New York State. We can deal with so much in terms of the rollback to civil rights if many more New Yorkers don't have to struggle so much to exercise the most basic constitutional right, and that is the right to vote. Thank you.
Now we are going to go to audience questions about that time. And we will start with Ms. James. This is asked by Kenneth from White Plains, and it's involving police shootings. As Attorney General, would you independently investigate police-involved deaths of unarmed citizens and those in police custody? If yes, explain. If not, why?
Thank you for the question. As someone who wrote a letter to the governor, as well as to Eric Snyderman, to appoint the Attorney General as the chief law enforcement officer when it comes to police shootings, when individuals die in the hands of police, I'm responsible for the current legislation. And the reason why that is because, again, as a public advocate of the city of New York, I led the way for body-worn cameras in NYPD. As someone who was responsible for ensuring that in public housing in the city of New York, most public housing in the city of New York now have cameras as a result of my initiative when I was a member of the city council. We also have technology in the city of New York known as ShotSpotter, where we can detect to a fine point where shots are being fired in the city of New York. It's really critically important that we have an independent Attorney General that can investigate police shootings, and particularly when individuals die at the hands of NYPD, but we need to expand that. Not only should we investigate individuals who die as a result of police shootings, but individuals who are severely injured as a result of police interaction. And last but not least, we need to reform our grand jury system because it's anachronistic and it's opaque. And we need to know when individuals, particularly district attorneys, go in and charge cases, that they have an independent relationship with the police department in the state of New York. That is what is critically important. And as someone who was part of the Civil Rights Bureau that investigated stop and frisk practices in NYPD, and as someone who was a plaintiff against the NYPD for stop and frisk practices violating the rights of individuals in the city of New York, I am someone who has, again, been in the forefront of police reform and someone who will continue that effort as the Attorney General of the state of New York. Why is that? Because my minister's been stopped. My nephew's been stopped. My brother's been stopped. My dentist has been stopped. And all of them were stopped simply because they were men of color in New York City. There's something wrong with that. We've got to change that. We've got to respect individuals and understand that we were all part of one human family. And we need to hold the police department all throughout the state of New York in all 62 counties. District attorneys and police need to be held accountable, and it needs more transparency in the state of New York.
We have to actually go really deep at this moment with the entire approach towards policing. And really, in a serious way, not just like saying the word, talk about community policing. But I want to tell you what I stand for and what I will do as Attorney General. The first is, the answer is yes, and I think it's actually a really critical role. The blue wall is a real problem. It's a problem for everybody, but it's a particular problem for communities of color as we see unjustifiable police violence, and then an effort to cover it up. And so we really need a truly independent attorney general who's willing to investigate that. One of the things that I think is really critical, again, New York, supposed to be the progressive beacon. In Las Vegas, they even have a saying, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. But when it comes to police violence, it is 1,000 years ahead of New York. In Las Vegas, it's just a basic matter of public accountability and transparency that an officer involved in shooting somebody, the name is released within 48 hours. You have to know who's involved in that violence within 48 hours. This is your government. And all unredacted footage is released within 72 hours. Here in New York, it took the family of Sahid Vassal, who was shot 4 months ago, 3.5 months to learn the names of the people who killed their son. That's wrong. Also in New York, we have a real problem with prosecutorial misconduct, and think of the harm that caused. Imagine being imprisoned and it turns out your prosecutor hid evidence on you. One study shows that New York is the 4th worst in the country in terms of the number of exonerations, people who have been found innocent after prosecutors hid evidence. So yes, I will be a watchdog, unafraid on police violence, and yes, I will investigate prosecutorial misconduct. Thank you.
The short answer to the question is yes, exclamation mark. And for those of you who may not be aware, the governor a few years ago issued an executive order that gave the Attorney General of the state of New York the specific power of a special prosecutor to investigate and prosecute any killing by a police officer of an unarmed civilian. So the explicit authority for the Attorney General of the state of New York to be a special prosecutor in those instances is unequivocally clear. And as Attorney General, I would aggressively pursue that path and conduct that investigation and prosecute if that is where the evidence leads us. But I also believe there is so much more that can be done. Transparency is important. I know it seems like not a big word. When it comes to law enforcement and criminal justice, transparency means knowledge, and knowledge means power. I don't know if those of you have had a chance to see the series that Errol Lewis of New York One has been doing, but I think he is now up to 4 cases of people who have served at least a decade and at least 2 instances more than 20 years in prison because of what appears to be inappropriate conduct by the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. These were men who it wasn't a case of them not having a fair trial. They were determined ultimately never to have committed the crime for which they have, in at least one instance, given up more than 25 years of their life. This is something that should outrage all of us. And as Attorney General, I recognize the DAs do good work, and almost all of them are extraordinary what they do. But if people can't have faith in our criminal justice system, we can't expect them to have faith in our government. And so this is going to be of paramount importance to me. Transparency in criminal justice prosecution, as well as serving as a special prosecutor in the event of an unarmed civilian being killed by someone in law enforcement. Thank you so much.
Well, much has been said on this. I do think at least one of us on the stage should probably say right up front that overwhelmingly the people who work in law enforcement are good people who are doing very dangerous jobs to protect all of us. I represent a lot of people who served on 9/11. I represent a lot of 9/11 families. I represent a lot of first responders, police and others who worked on the pile and who rushed in to save people at great risk to themselves and to their long-term health. And I am deeply uncomfortable with a Democratic Party that has started to paint law enforcement with a broad brush, and I think it's wrong to start throwing out accusations that are incendiary, particularly for political purposes. But Randy and I have 3 diverse children. When my son gets in a car, he's not the son of a congressman, he's a young Latino man, all by himself. And we worry about that. And when my daughters go out by themselves, they're not the daughters of a United States congressman, they are African American, they're diverse. And people look at them a certain way, and we know that, and we feel that in our own family, at our own kitchen table. My family is not the ideal family in a lot of people's view. We don't fit in a lot of people's definition of who counts. We couldn't get married for the first 22 years we were together. So I feel these issues in my own life. We have felt the sting of legal discrimination in my house. When I came to Congress, Randy couldn't have health insurance. It was illegal under federal law to cover my family with health insurance. That is active federal discrimination right now. So these issues remain important, and there's still work to do. The Attorney General can float above local law enforcement and can be an independent prosecutor and investigator of police misconduct. You bet. I support that. It's very important. It's very important to elevate it so that we can have an honest finding of fact. And the one thing we all have to believe in is due process. We all have to believe in a neutral, fair process where we get at the facts, without fear, without favor. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter who your friends are, it matters what happened. Technology can help, body cameras are essential, other technologies can really help us get at the truth. And the independence of the New York Attorney General is critical on this, so I will absolutely ask the governor to give me that authority in any case where there's a police-involved shooting and where the local authorities, the DA or the police, cannot do a fair and honest investigation. It absolutely is essential to justice. Thank you very much.
We're going to start, Ms. Teachout, is gun lobby. This question is asked by Amy from Largemont. State attorney generals have been able to fight powerful businesses' lobbies in areas like tobacco and healthcare, where the federal government was unwilling to step in. The gun lobby has been granted special rights by Congress to help void liability, even when they knowingly sell to fraudulent dealers. What actions would you take as Attorney General to hold gun makers accountable in New York?
Yes. Every single thing we can do. And I am proud to say that I am a Moms Demand Gun Sense candidate, and thank you to all the amazing Moms Demand activists out there. And thank you to all the young people who've really been leading in the last few years. Here's one of the root issues that I want to talk about. First of all, we have to go after gun manufacturers for what they're doing. And some of this involves congressional change. We don't even have the full research that we need at the federal level, but you want to hear what I can do as AG, and you want to hear what's going on. One is there's investigating gun manufacturers in terms of their own practices, what they know, what they're not sharing, what they know in terms of the harm they're causing. But the other is also investigating the NRA itself for its own role, in particular questions about its abuse of its nonprofit status and the way in which money shifts between nonprofit and for-profit and other organizations. And there's a very powerful role that the state AG can play there. The NRA doesn't like me very much. As I said earlier today, the host of NRA TV tweeted about me twice today just to say that I was the wrong candidate for New York. I take that as a badge of honor. But I also want to be real about the root issue here. The root issue here is actually a Supreme Court decision in 2008. This is a case called Heller. And this case radically misinterpreted Second Amendment rights to say that local communities could not protect their own health and safety and pass strong gun reform laws. So when I look at the Supreme Court, I think not just about Roe versus Wade and voting rights and Citizens United, but also about a legal strategy to move using the facts on the ground as we know them to overturn this decision that radically misunderstood the Second Amendment and has led to so much gun violence and suffering in this country. Thank you.
No, yeah, you move down, just like you did.
Oh, okay. Oh, I thought we should, okay, all right. So, the question was on NRA.
Yes, the gun lobbies.
Yes. Joe Biden, author of the Cops Bill, and I agree with Sean. The persons who hate a bad cop more than just about anybody else are the good cops that do play by the rules, do follow the laws, and go into harm's way every day to keep us safe. When I worked for Joe, we focused on the gun show loophole, trying to close it. NRA, incredibly powerful, still not closed. Assault weapons ban expired, still not reenacted, needs to happen. We've got strong gun laws in this state, but anybody that tells you that our strong gun laws are gonna make us exponentially safer, unfortunately, is just not giving you the whole truth. Because you can go to Cleveland, Ohio, you can go to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and buy pretty much whatever the heck you wanna buy, and it can be used to bring harm to fellow New Yorkers. And so we need to do everything within our power, whether it's litigation, civilly, or criminally, or moving this Congress to finally do right by all Americans by having rational and sane gun laws. We have got to continue to fight, and really the only way it's gonna happen is if we turn the House of Representatives blue. That's the only way that we are going to get common sense gun control laws at the federal level that will finally say no to the NRA. And I will be as aggressive as possible in working with our colleagues in Congress and working with advocates to make that happen, to get more Democrats elected across the state, including parts of the state that are more rural, where you tend to have more Republicans and more purple Democrats than bright red-blue ones. But I think that's critically important, and we have to do it because at the end of the day, the guns are coming in by the thousands into our state, and we are in effect powerless to stop it without powerful common sense gun control laws in Washington. So that's what I would do as Attorney General, and working in partnership with state attorneys general across the country to collectively use all the tools that we have available in the states to fight back against the NRA. Thank you.
You know, a couple weeks after I was elected in 2012, just a few miles from the Eastern District of my border, there was that terrible shooting in Newtown. And so from the minute I entered Congress until the last few weeks, mass shootings, school shootings have been increasingly a reality for those of us in public life. And I have to tell you, I mean, Randy and I knew the names of some of the kids killed in the nightclub Pulse in Orlando. The first thing we need to do is stop having stupid moments of silence and start acting. And as soon as we start acting, we better ask whether Democrats have the backbone to do this as well as Republicans, because we ought to remember that it was Democrats and Republicans who killed our best shot at gun control a few years ago. And so Democrats better show some spine on this. I represent a Trump district. I'm not some guy who represents New York City. I'm not sitting around on the city council in New York where it's really easy to be for tough gun laws. I'm not doing it in a classroom at Fordham, all due respect. And I'm not a lobbyist for a telecommunications company. I'm a member of Congress who represents a Trump district. And from the day I walked into Congress, I supported the assault weapons ban. I supported real control on the lethality of these weapons, on raising the age, on real background checks so we understand who's buying these guns, on no fly, no buy. So if you're on an anti-terrorist list, you can't walk in and buy a gun. And the NRA has real say in my district. I have 25% military veterans in my district, and I got to correct one thing Zephyr said. When Zephyr ran for Congress, she opposed the SAFE Act. I mean, we ought to be honest with these people. She opposed the SAFE Act. She opposed the most important gun control legislation we passed after Newtown in New York. She said it was probably unconstitutional. She said it's because she grew up as a Rockefeller Republican and she had real problems with the way it was passed. And you opposed it. Yes, you did. And when you were up there opposing it, I was winning my seat against a Republican when Trump was winning my district supporting real gun safety legislation. You better have Democrats who've actually done it. I've done it. I'm proud of my record. It's easy to talk about. But when the NRA is coming after you in a tough fight in the Trump district and you stand up for the gun safety legislation I've supported, that's the real test, ladies and gentlemen. And I will humbly submit to you that I have walked the walk on this issue, and I will do it every day as Attorney General. Thank you.
I've been in public life for about 30 years. And one of the worst things about being an elected official is that I've attended too many funerals of young men and women who've died as a result of gun violence. I've held too many mothers, too many grandmothers. I've seen too many people cry before open caskets. It's the worst thing about being an elected official. It happens in urban centers all across this country. And so I have stood up against the NRA. And in fact, the NRA, they're trolling me. They actually spell my name wrong, but it's okay. I serve on the NYSERS board. We divested from gun retailers as a result of my leadership. I went to a bank recently that funded the NRA. We held protest against this bank. This bank has decided not to provide any additional funds to the NRA. It's outrageous and unconscionable that this president of the United States would support 3D guns and allow them to release the plans on the internet. And I'm so glad that the attorney generals across this nation, including our Attorney General Barbara Underwood, has joined in litigation against these 3D guns. And the SAFE Act. The SAFE Act is good. I support the SAFE Act, but it's not enough. We need to trace where the guns are coming from so that we can go after those states that have lax gun laws, including all of those in the South. We are getting guns from Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Unfortunately, we cannot track those guns, and we need to change that in the legislation, which is why the SAFE Act I support it, but it does not go far enough. We also need to track the bullets. It's really critically important. And I am not afraid to say that or take that position, be it in Brooklyn or Buffalo. It really doesn't matter. Because when you have seen too many dead boys before you in open caskets, then you should not be fearless and fearful of the NRA. And as the Attorney General, the NRA has an office in New York. And as someone who heads the Charity Bureau, and because it is a not-for-profit, we should use the laws of the state of New York and the Charities Bureau to go after the NRA and close them down, just as we did the Ku Klux Klan, and bankrupt them and take their funds and invest in communities that have historically been underfunded. That's what I will do as Attorney General of the state of New York.
This is the last question from the audience, and we're going to start off with Ms. Eve. It's about children's rights, and it's asked by Barry from Yonkers. It's often said that the New York Attorney General is the people's lawyer, especially for those who otherwise might not have the ability to safeguard their own legal rights and rely on others to act as guardians, such as children. How do you view the role as an AG in protecting rights of New York State's children, especially those children living in poor urban and rural areas, to ensure they can access the sound education that is guaranteed in the state's constitution?
I so appreciate whomever asked that question, because one of the things I have been talking about on the campaign trail, yes, I talk about Donald Trump. There's probably no daylight amongst us in terms of how he should go, but he's going to be with us for another 2 years unless he gets impeached. That's the reality of the situation. But I'm glad someone brought up education, because at the end of the day, as was referenced in our question, there is a role. Whether people don't think officially there is, as Attorney General, I would have it at the core of what I do. to ensure that every single child is entitled to what the New York State Court of Appeals, the body that I proudly served for 2 years after graduating from Harvard Law School, made unequivocally clear that every single child in our state under the New York State Constitution is entitled to a sound, quality, basic education. That court also determined that too many of our children are not receiving it. And if you don't have a quality basic education, you don't have the opportunity for economic advancement. You don't have the opportunity to use the God-given talents you have been given to have a productive life for you and your family and to help empower your communities. I believe this is at the core of what the Attorney General's office should do. And that, without question, would be my mission. Many of you in this room are probably people who graduated as an EOP student or an HEOP student. More than 100,000 young people, mostly young men and women of color, are EOP and HOP graduates. That is a result of legislation my father authored almost 40 years ago as not the party-endorsed candidate, but as an independent voice for education reform across the state. As Attorney General, I would aggressively enforce the Court of Appeals decision and the New York State Constitution so that all children have the opportunity to reach their potential. That's morally required, it's the smart thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and it's what our state's highest court commanded the state of New York to do. Thank you.
Well, you know, I think about this issue as a parent. So, starting in 1993 and every day since, Randy and I have been raising 3 children who came from very different backgrounds and who desperately needed good homes. And all of them have been an extraordinary blessing in our lives. And we have also been up and down and through the ringer on every educational issue you can imagine. And Randy's done more of this than I have, but we understand what it's like to have a kid who is trying to navigate the special needs system in New York State. We understand what it's like to try to get a good basic education in a public school system that is maybe trying to skirt what its real responsibilities are, but at the same time doesn't have the resources to provide them. And I have to tell you, we've done a lot of talking tonight about Donald Trump. We've done a lot of talking tonight about prosecuting this and prosecuting that. The truth is, the Attorney General of New York, for most of its history, was first and foremost a consumer advocate and defender of consumer protection and a prosecutor of consumer fraud. So I am very interested, ladies and gentlemen, in the profit motive that is driving up the cost of education in our state. I think it's very critical when you look at what's going on in Washington that we push back against this Betsy DeVos character and all this nonsense of trying to undo all the Obama administration's good work and they're about to let the private colleges run rampant again. If you look at the way debt was run up by our students, if you look at the way money has infected education and is draining off your tax dollars in the state of New York, where we spend more per pupil than any other state and yet get worse results. It is because so many people are in there taking that money who don't deserve it. And the New York Attorney General, with the consumer fraud powers this office has, can absolutely shine a light on that and hold people accountable and can push back as the federal government starts to go back into the dark spaces of money and education at every level. And we will absolutely do that if you give me this authority in the office. Thank you.
The Campaign for Fiscal Equity, unfortunately, we're in violation of the law as we speak. I believe I'm the only candidate who has actually been involved in that case from the very beginning. The plaintiff in that case, Councilmember Jackson, proudly served with me in the city council as he now seeks to become the next senator in Manhattan. Campaign for Fiscal Equity, we also have an issue with charter schools. I am the only candidate running for Attorney General that's actually sued Success Academy and has taken on a number of charter schools in the city of New York because they divert funds from our public school system in the city of New York. It's really critically important that we ensure that the laws provide basic education, basic and sound education to the residents of the state of New York. Our schools are more segregated now than they've ever been since Brown versus Board of Education, and we've got to address that. When you go to schools all throughout the state of New York and they don't have technology, when they don't have smart boards, when classroom size is exploding, we've got a major problem. We also need to get rid of high-stakes testing because it provides too much pressure on children in our public school system in the city of New York. Instead of building prisons, we need to invest more in public education, and we need to more invest in human development and in human capital. We need to focus on the needs of individuals in the state of New York. And lastly, let me say, as a public advocate, I am so proud because we just recently passed universal school lunch for all children in the public school system in the city of New York. Why did I do that? Because we need to remove the stigma of poverty. And too many children came up to me and said, Tish, they call me Po Child. I have a card and I have to stand on a line to get food. I don't want to show my card, and that's why I'm hungry. We no longer in the city of New York, and hopefully as we expand it to the state of New York, we need to expand universal school lunch so that no child in this state goes hungry during school, and that the only thing that they are focused on is education. Education is the key to success. Education is the reason why I am before you. Education removes all isms, racism, sexism, and everything. Education is the equal, makes us all equal, and is the great equalizer in our country and in our state. Education should be our priority, and our priority for this governor, for this legislature, and for the next Attorney General, Letitia James.
I just want to clear up the record. What Sean said earlier is not true. I'm a lawyer's lawyer, and I care deeply about process. And I am concerned about legislation that passes in the dead of night. But I believe in New York State having the strongest gun laws in the country, and I will continue to do that. I also want to say that almost everything that Congressman Maloney has talked about tonight in terms of taking on Trump has to do with being in Congress. So I got a great idea for him. And I do think it's really important that the next Attorney General be an unequivocal, true blue Democrat. And Congressman Maloney has voted 34% of the time with Trump and supported Republicans. And I'm an unabashed, progressive Democrat and will be as Attorney General. My first job right out of college was a special education teacher's aide. I worked in a classroom with an 8-year-old boy who had been through 4 foster homes and who told me he had no imagination. No 8-year-old doesn't have an imagination. The only reason that he believed that is people had told him that. And he had felt treated like a widget, not a full person. I will fight for full funding of public education in New York schools, for pre-K, for small classroom sizes, against high-stakes testing, and against an entire approach towards children and education which treats them as little units instead of as full, creative human beings. And it's especially important to fight for children using this sort of law because they don't have a voice. Thanks.
Now we're going to do closing statements, and we're going to start with Ms. Eve and work our way back. And you have 3 minutes.
Well, first of all, let me thank you. I thought you did a fabulous job as our guardian. Because these issues are so important, and I know the night is getting long, but I want to thank and applaud all of you for being here, because all of you to go and talk to members of your family and friends and talk to them about what you've heard, and most importantly, encourage them to vote. I stand before you, as I said at the very outset, the most qualified, experienced, ready, steady hand to be the effective Attorney General we must have on January 1. That is why I'm running, to protect, defend, and empower New Yorkers. I will aggressively continue litigation against this administration that is seeking to roll back all the rights and the values that we hold dear. I will aggressively go after bad government actors that is on us. Our poor voting laws, that is on us. Lack of educational opportunity is on us. I'm a product of the public school system. I didn't go to school in another country or in the West Coast. You know, Vermont's a great place. New York is my home. My roots in this state run deep. I stand before you as a candidate for Attorney General. Yes, a very proud graduate of Harvard Law School, the first person of my family to go to law school. But the foundation, the ability for me to be able to do so is the extraordinarily wonderful quality public school education that I received. But all too often in so many communities, my experience is the exception rather than the rule. And for the sake of our communities and our state, it needs to be the rule rather than the exception. I ask for your consideration, and I ask for your vote, and I ask you to get every single person that you know, Democrat, whether in this county or across the state, to vote. Because millions of us are registered to vote, and only a fraction of us take a few minutes of our time to do just that. You want to make a difference? Take 10 minutes at a time. It doesn't cost you a dime. Vote. I ask you to believe in Eve. Vote for Alicia Eve for Attorney General on September 13th. Thank you so much.
What an amazing evening. Thank you all. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking out in the heat. I want to return to this moment we're in, because the job of the Attorney General's office is not the same right now as it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago because of Donald Trump. This truly is an existential crisis. And my vision of the office is that there are a few things that are required. One, a deep expertise and knowledge of anti-corruption and constitutional law, and a history of creative, boundary-pushing strategies that can actually change our future. We need to be a bulwark against Donald Trump. And that means, one, investigating his businesses. That is a strategy I've been pushing for 20 months that finally had a huge victory just 2 weeks ago in Maryland District Court. And that's just the first of many victories. Two, being ready to prosecute his associates if he pardons them in a self-serving way. Saying, we in New York say no one is above the law. Being ready also to say, when you can't trust the EPA, you need an Attorney General who's going to enforce our health and protect our air and water. When you can't trust the federal government on financial crimes, you need a New York State Attorney General who's going to be ready to enforce those laws at home. The last thing I want to say is there's a root issue here about what's happening with money in politics. And the reason I will be able to not only bring my expertise, but be wholly independent, taking on power, whether that's Andrew Cuomo's administration, or the legislature, or ExxonMobil, or New York City real estate, or private equity, is I don't take corporate money. And change has to start with us. We're in a Democratic primary. We can all choose to run a true people power campaign. Thank you so much. Get out and vote. Tell your friends to vote. Organize, door knock, and I'll see you on September 13th.
It's just heating up now. We gotta leave. The interesting part just began. I don't know about you, but I want to go another round or two. I want to thank all of you for coming out. And I want all of you to understand that you obviously have made a lot of progress in resisting Donald Trump, and that you recognize that politics and democracy is not a spectator sport. So I thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to hear from all of my friends. But I think it's important that we all understand that we are in a precarious moment at this point in time. We're in the midst of a constitutional crisis in our country. And I think it's also important that individuals understand the role of the Attorney General.
70% of what the Attorney General does doesn't get headlines. It's not sexy. You represent the state, you represent the governor, whether you like it or not. 20% is affirmative litigation, bringing patent practice cases, and 10% is advocacy. Yes, you can stretch the boundaries as I have done in the Office of Public Advocate, and we need to continue to do that. But it's important that as I travel through the state of New York, I hear from consumers who say, Tish, I've been defrauded by a car automobile outfit. Tish, I'm an immigrant and I've been defrauded because someone said I can get an asylum petition granted overnight. So consumer fraud is a major issue. Healthcare is a major issue. Individuals call me all the time and say, Tish, we need to talk about healthcare. Everyone's talking about Trump, that's important, but healthcare is being denied. Medicaid fraud is a major issue. Wall Street is a major issue. No one talked tonight about the Martin Act and how we have to use the Martin Act and make sure that we police Wall Street. We need to talk about all of these consolidations and mergers that are happening to major corporations. We need to talk about our tax base and the fact that all of us right now are in the same boat as a result of tax policies in Albany, because individuals who are rich and powerful are getting richer and powerful, and working class people, unfortunately, are falling further and further behind. And all that we want as a society to make sure that the next generation, our children, live better than we do. As the Attorney General of the state of New York, you've got to enforce the law. You've got to be persistent. You've got to be passionate. You've got to be knowledgeable. And you also have to understand, as was mentioned, not everyone in Albany, I don't believe everyone in Albany is corrupt. There are some fine elected officials in Albany. But we do have a problem in Albany with 30 elected officials over 10 years have been convicted. It's really critically important that we go after the bad actors and that we follow the facts and the evidence wherever it lies. It's also important that we also understand we have some great law enforcement officers, individuals who give up themselves each and every day, and I pray that they go home to their families every night. But as the Attorney General, you've got to speak to everyone, and you've got to speak about the law, and you've got to speak about your passion, and you've got to stand for something, otherwise you stand for nothing. And all that I stand for, all throughout my public career, all 30 years, I stand before you in the spirit of Shirley Chisholm, who's unbought and unbossed. And I stand before you as someone who breathes and lives justice, justice, justice for all, because we truly are, at this point in time in our country, indivisible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indivisible Westchester. Thank you to my moderator, Mrs. Harder, and Looks. Thank you, my colleagues and friends. Look, we're not going to agree on everything. I will tell you what, though, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say, if you want somebody to stand up to Donald Trump, you have to have somebody who has beat Republicans in real races. And somebody who has stood his ground as a gay man in a Trump district with an interracial family and has come out on top. And who has gone on the floor every day in the House of Representatives for 6 years and has won the important fights. Whether we're talking about saving the Affordable Care Act, whether we're talking about stopping the Muslim ban, whether we're talking about defending the rights of LGBT people, whether we're talking about sticking up for programs like Social Security and Medicare, and the Medicaid that is so critical in the state, and the millions of people under expanded Medicaid who are getting help fighting the opioid and heroin epidemic. Those are fights we have been winning, and I have been in that fight. And by the way, that bipartisanship score, that's a feature, not a bug. I'm pretty proud of that. If you want to know why we're going to have real legislation fighting Lyme disease in the Hudson Valley, it's because I did that. If you want to know why you're not going to have oil barges on the Hudson River polluting up the river, it's because I stopped it. If you want to know why the veterans are going to finally get notified, their service agencies proactively when they come home so they get better care, we reform how we do veterans care in this country, it's because I passed that bill. I've not only beat Republicans, I've gone to Congress and got things done. You know what that's called, Jennifer? It's called doing your job. And I am proud that I've done my job and delivered to the people who I represent in the Hudson Valley. But I'll tell you what, if you put me in the fight with Donald Trump, you are going to see the tenacity and the grit and the skill that I've used to win these fights in Congress at play in that most important fight of all. Because families like mine are in the crosshairs. And I don't need a lecture about what Donald Trump represents as a threat. It's families like mine, ladies and gentlemen, that are going to be the first ones hurt if we don't start winning these fights again. I have won these fights. I can do it again. Please, give me a chance to do this job, and you will be proud of the work I do in this office. I need your help. I need your vote. I am respectfully asking you to vote for me on September 13th. Thank you very much, and together we're going to win this. Thanks.